Good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for being here with us tonight for our virtual book talk on The Change Agent, Pat McCrory's Rise, Reckoning, and Legacy, with journalist and author Andrew Dunn and former North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory. I'm going to begin with a little bit of a personal caveat, which is that when I first moved from DC to North Carolina in 2014, one of the first things I did when I arrived in the state was attend a political fundraiser in my neighborhood, as one does. I was excited to meet my new neighbors, and one of them was introduced to me simply as my friend Pat. What they didn't mention was that he was the sitting governor of our state, that he'd been our city's mayor for 14 years. Oh, and that the fundraiser was actually for him. That always stuck with me because it reflected how so many people in our community saw Pat McCrory, not as a politician, but as a friend. A friend to the city of Charlotte, a friend to the state of North Carolina, and a friend to the values that many of us were trying to uphold. Tonight, I'm glad to introduce Pat not just as my friend, but as a friend to Principles First. I'm equally grateful to welcome Andrew Dunn, whose thoughtful reporting and research produced the book we'll be discussing this evening. For those who may be new to Principles First, we are a nationwide grassroots movement of people who share a love of democracy and concern for the direction of our existing political leadership. Through in-person and virtual events like this one, we strive to encourage a thoughtful civic conversation and remind people that we often have more in common than our politics suggest. That idea, that people can come together despite their differences, is one that Governor McCrory is intimately familiar with, and one that he tried to embrace throughout his time in public service. As Andrew outlines in this book, there were moments of both success and of setback, but there are valuable lessons to be learned from leading through a period of rapid political and cultural change. Many of us are members of Principles First because we're hoping the political landscape will change once again and return to a place where character, integrity, and coalition building matter more than personal loyalty or political spectacle. Before we get started, just one quick housekeeping item. We will reserve some time for audience questions at the end of this discussion. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as our time allows. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn things over to our moderator and Principles First Executive Director, Brittany Martinez. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to be with you all. And before we get started, I'm just going to do some spotlights here. We like to multitask here at Principles First, and we are really happy to have you. Whether this is your first time here with Principles First or you've been to a bunch of our events, it is such a pleasure to have you join us today. And thank you, Rory, for that introduction. And Rory is one of our wonderful state leads in New York, and we are so grateful for her and for the introduction that she made to us with Governor Pat McCrory. And, you know, I first got to know him over some phone calls and some Zoom chats, and we got to share the summit stage together earlier this year with Bill Crystal and with Chuck Todd. That was our opening session at our summit. So that was incredibly exciting. So we are so glad to have Governor McCrory again. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And our new friend, Andrew Dunn, we are so enthused to have you. I think this is going to be such a great conversation. And Andrew, I'm going to go to you first with questions. And again, please feel free to throw some questions into the chat as we go. It's probably better that you do so sooner rather than later so that people aren't just scrambling at the end and we can make sure that we're moving along swimmingly. So Andrew, first of all, let me say, I'm going to be honest, this type of genre of book is not necessarily the one that I gravitate towards because I work in news adjacent things, right? And I'm sure I'm an outlier here because this group of folks are very well read, well educated, civically engaged. But I like my little fantasy books, right? It's hard out there, but let me tell you, this book was so good. It was incredibly well written. Like, if you haven't gotten the book, please, really get it because it is so well written. It is just very illuminating. And so first of all, congratulations. It was such a great book to read.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation here tonight.
Yes, yes, we are so glad to have you. And I guess the first question, for folks who are perhaps didn't get the chance to read your book yet, I know you mentioned some of it in the foreword, but what was it that made Governor McCrory and his political career an interesting subject for your book that you thought was worth making sure that the American people knew?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I had never really met or spoken with Governor McCrory before I started on this project, but I've covered North Carolina politics for the better part of the last 2 decades. And, it just really stuck in my craw that the real story had never really been told. The way that Governor McCrory's political career ended, it made it really easy to dismiss him, write him off, or forget about him. But I was always captivated by the idea of how much change had happened over those 4 years and the previous 14 as mayor. And I thought North Carolina would be well served to understand that story and learn from it.
No, thank you. And I mean, a great subject matter for sure. Again, everyone, this is a really great book. I bought mine via Amazon. So please go and check out the best places to go ahead and get it. And Governor, again, thank you for joining us. And my next question is for you. And you spent many years as mayor. Transportation was a major focus of your time as mayor. And you were an early champion of light rail in Charlotte at a time when that wasn't necessarily an obvious position for Republicans. And today, the Blue Line has fundamentally, if I understand correctly, changed the way parts of Charlotte look and grow. How did you convince voters and members of your own party to invest in something when the political benefit may not come for long after you're in office?
Well, actually, I had to convince myself first because when I ran for mayor, I didn't even bring up light rail. But I studied an old plan that had been sitting on the shelf called the 25-year transportation land use plan that no one had moved on because there was no money for it. This is in my first week in office. I looked at it at the back of the credenza of the mayor's office. I said, this is interesting. And I read it and I went, my gosh, this makes sense. Charlotte was growing at a much faster rate than anyone had ever imagined and still is. And I started going, you know what? We can't widen certain highways anymore. So what's our city going to look like 30 or 40 or 50 years from now if we do nothing versus if we do something? And I've always believed doing nothing is doing something. And there is going to be a result of doing nothing. So I went to it's in the book here where I told the story to Andrew. I went to my old boss at Duke Energy Company who had just retired and he had a cubicle at the company. And I went into his cubicle and I remember when he said, come on in, Mayor, I kind of looked, who is he talking about? Because I saw Mr. Lee as, an old World War II guy, Princeton grad, engineer. And in talking to him, I said, I'm looking at this mass transit plan. What do you think? And he said the following, and it has stuck with me for life. By the way, I thought he was 80 something years old. He was 64 at the time, which is kind of ironic because I'm 69 now, and I thought he was 100 years old. But he said, Mayor, you can wait until the pain arrives and do it then. And it will be an easy sell, but you've probably waited too long then. Or you can do it now before the pain arrives. But if you do it now, it's going to be one hell of a sale, but it'll probably work. And I just thought that I related it to healthcare. Your own, by the way, he died probably a month later. He was a big smoker and a little bit of a drinker. And I think the doctor had just told him, you need to quit smoking. Well, it was too late. It was an easy sell to get him to quit smoking, but it was too late. So that related kind of to the mass transit thing. And so from there, I developed a strategy and I had to sell it. And I found out the best way to sell it is show pictures of what Charlotte will look like if we do something 25 years from now versus what will Charlotte look like if we do nothing 25 years from now. And I felt the visual way was to sell it. And I had to sell it to the voters, and I also had to sell it to the state legislature because they had to give me permission to sell. And my Republicans were furious with me. Where the hell did this come from? We thought you were a conservative, but guess who was the first person to help me? Jesse Helms, Senator No from North Carolina. I brought him up to my office, and he looked out the window to the east, and he said, I grew up 50 miles from here. There used to be nothing between here and there, and look how it's changed, and it's only going to get worse. And he said, Mayor, you have my total support. And he got me my first federal grant, kind of got me into the system. And the way it works, if you don't get in the system, you don't get any more money. So of all things, Jesse Helms, the most conservative member of the Senate in a long time, was the one who got me and the city the money. You never know what coattails you're going to get.
Absolutely. Sometimes allies come in the least likely places and make incredible friends and allies. And that's an incredible story. Thank you. And before the next question, I see, Chris, you did put something in the question and answer asking about the chat. So because this is a webinar, I don't think the chat feature is allowed. Forgive us. This is our first webinar in a minute. So we are reacquainting ourselves. But if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then we're going to get to them towards the end. So Andrew, my next question is for you. The title of your book is The Change Agent. There are moments in someone's career that make national headlines, and then there are things that actually shape their legacy over the long term. Having studied Governor McCrory's career so closely, what do you think belongs in that second category?
Yeah, another great question. In the course of the book, Governor McCrory had a line that he used to use quite a bit, both as mayor and then later as governor, where he'd say, the decisions that we're making today, we won't really know the full impact for at least 10 years. And that's been, definitely true for a lot of Governor McCrory's biggest successes. In Charlotte, we just talked about one of the obvious ones, the light rail. But really, when you look at the skyline of Charlotte today, you'll see McCrory's fingerprints all over it. Now, at the state level, it's a little bit harder to see sometimes, but nonetheless, it has been, it was a period of dramatic change. So a couple things that I'll highlight. Number one is the 2013 tax reform law in North Carolina. It almost didn't happen. And there's a great scene in the book where it's the summer of 2013, the House and the Senate are at an impasse. And Governor McCrory, spent a couple sweltering days in the old Capitol with the House Speaker and the Senate President pro tem trying to hash out a deal. And we've seen just over the past 2 years what can happen when you don't have the kind of leader who can bring people together. We had a budget stalemate for 2 years now. Anybody in the audience who's from North Carolina has doubtlessly heard about that. But I also want to talk about a couple other things that didn't make national headlines, but nonetheless were incredibly meaningful for North Carolina. A lot of it was at the cabinet level. There's another great scene in the book, The Change Agent, which if anybody hasn't ordered it, go on Amazon and check it out. There it is. But every cabinet meeting, they really were laser focused on what's broken, what needs to be fixed, and how do we get it done as quick as possible. So at the Department of Health and Human Services, when the McCrory administration came in, they inherited a multi-$100 million deficit. Within 2 years, it had been completely right-sized and was back in the black. You look at jobs and economic development. North Carolina in 2013 was still really hurting from the Great Recession. And a lot of it had to do with an outdated way of pursuing new businesses. And so McCrory and his Commerce Secretary, Sharon Decker, put together a plan and a new economic development partnership. And when you look at North Carolina today, the booming success that it is today, it's easy to take it for granted. But a lot of the success that we see today is due to the decisions and the choices that the McCrory administration made 10 plus years ago.
Well, thank you. And I think that is a really good segue into the next question for you, Governor. And I found this really interesting in the book. Oftentimes, So we've had someone like a Ronald Reagan, who I could be wrong about the number here, but I think he became president on his third time running for president, right? So there are definitely times when people get multiple chances to run for something or try running for something, but oftentimes you get one shot and that's it. In 2008, you lost your first race for governor, but 4 years later, you came back and won decisively. Many candidates who lose a race for an office never get the opportunity to win it. Why do you think North Carolinians felt differently about you? Was it your agenda, your message, the way you ran the campaign, or something else that you learned from your first loss?
You know, I was shocked. After I lost, I thought that was my political career. I was satisfied. I'd been mayor. I was never expected to win that race. It was much closer than people anticipated. And in fact, the RGA kind of pulled out on me thinking it was going to be a landslide. They quit giving money. We lost by what, 3 points, Andrew? I don't know. It ended up being a very close race against a good person, by the way. But I think I was asked back because two reasons. One is it was a lot closer than anticipated. The surveys suddenly looked good 2 years later, and I was already finished with politics. And someone said, "Have you seen the surveys?" But let me tell you a story that is in the book, which I had forgotten about. My campaign manager, Jack Hawk, who's a great guy, we had a very close election, and there was a chance we could win this, you know, when it's 2 or 3 points. And they were running a pretty cheap ad against me. I don't want to take time, but accusing me of dumping New York trash in North Carolina. We came out of nowhere. It came from a National League of Cities conference, which I wasn't really a part of. And they passed a resolution where states could transfer trash to another. Since Charlotte was a member of the National League of Cities, Pat McCrory must be for it. It was a very effective commercial. So Jack called me to Raleigh and pulled out his laptop computer, which was still pretty new at the time, and showed me a commercial that he had done that I didn't know. And the commercial basically blamed my opponent, Beverly Perdue, for the killing of the student body president at UNC Chapel Hill that had just occurred. Pretty brutal murder. And he said, "If we run this commercial, it's the only chance you will win." And I looked at it, very effective commercial, and I said, "I can't do it." The parents, if they called me up, I wouldn't have a response. In today's politics, they'd do it in a minute. But I think had I shown that commercial, I might have still lost, and my reputation would have been soiled. The hell with politics. I think my reputation would have been sold in that time's politics. Today, who knows? But I think we made the right decisions. We ran a very positive campaign, and my negatives weren't high when we lost. So, despite me dumping trash, New York trash in North Carolina. So, those are two stories that kind of surprised me, too.
Yeah, and Governor, you'll need to tell the George Foreman story here in a second, but it was actually pretty remarkable how quickly the voters of North Carolina were showing their buyer's remorse. I mean, it was within months of the 2008 election, which you also have to keep in mind. Barack Obama won North Carolina that year, the only Democrat to win as a presidential candidate since Jimmy Carter. And, usually in North Carolina, Democrats are running away from the presidential candidate. This was the one time where the presidential candidate kind of saved the governor. Yeah, I mean, it was within months that people were wishing that they had gone the other direction, to the point where when Governor McCrory launched his 2012 campaign, the official theme song was by The Who, "Won't Get Fooled Again."
Mm-hmm. Governor, I think we need to hear the George Foreman story.
Well, very quickly, George Foreman and I got to know each other because he was the guest host every year of a college football game in Charlotte. I'd always go out and flip the coin with him. And he was an incredible guy, smart. And he told me about the beginning of the Foreman Grill and his boxing career. And I had just lost that race. And he said, "How you doing?" And I said, "I'm having a tough time." He said, "Why?" He said, "I lost Charlotte, my hometown." where I've been mayor for 7 terms. I lost Charlotte, my hometown, and it really hurt me.
Only 300 votes, though.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it was very close, but
it
yes.
still hurt. But he sent me 2 weeks later in the mail, I got a pair of boxing gloves. And on one set of boxing gloves, you might be too young for this. He said, I went to Africa against Muhammad Ali, and the people cheered against me, and I'm from Africa. And they rooted for Ali. And he said he was hurt by that tremendously. And on the other hand, he wrote on the boxing glove, and I still have them. It said, with this left hand, I kept swinging even when I was knocked down. And I put those gloves on the mayor's office desk. And then when I got elected governor 3 years later, they stayed on the governor's desk. And I still look at them occasionally because we all get knocked down. How are you going to get back up is the big issue. So I hated George Foreman died recently, and I wish I could have talked to him again. We never saw each other again, but it meant a lot to me.
And I think that's something that everyone resonates with everyone. You know, we've all had those moments, and it's what you do after those moments that I think really defines the character of a person.
Yeah, easier said than done.
Easier said than absolutely. And you're right. And so thank you for sharing that story. It was lovely. Andrew, back to you. One of your conclusions in this book is that Governor McCrory wasn't uniquely radical on transgender issues, but that he was early. He stepped into a debate that would soon become national. How much did the timing itself shape the political consequences he faced? And do you think his experience would have been different had the same fight happened several years later? And Governor, I'd be curious to know your thoughts as well, if you have any you'd like to share.
I mean, it's undeniable that the ramifications would have been completely different today versus 2016. I mean, 2016 was truly the peak of the cancel culture wave. It was really the first crest of that political movement. And North Carolina wasn't really used to being sort of the epicenter of national political fights. This was really one of the first ones, and the left was really flexing their muscles. They did it in Indiana, and then they took that same playbook right here to North Carolina. But the book kind of talks about, two characters really show the evolution there. One is Megyn Kelly, the media personality. In 2016, on Fox News, she was grilling Governor McCrory. Why would you do this law, this HB2 law? What are you thinking? And then within 4 or 5 years, now she's completely flipped and made that one of her signature issues. And the same goes for President Trump. 2016, he didn't really want to touch it. And then the 2024 election, that was his most devastating commercial against Kamala Harris. So, I mean, 8 years is not a lot of time, but somehow we managed as a country to completely flip-flop on that.
And if I remember reading it correctly, Governor, I think you also received a phone call from the then candidate, now President Trump, saying, good job sticking to your guns. And then if I also recall correctly, I think he later said, I don't know why he got into it in the first place. So I thought that was very interesting.
Well, he actually called me up at 10 o'clock at night. And at the time I thought I was going to win and he was going to lose, which is kind of wrong. And he said, what's this bathroom shit? That's the first thing he said to me. Excuse my language, but I'm quoting the now president of the United States. And I tried to explain it to him, and I could tell he didn't get it. And I finally said, just stay out of it. It's not worth it, because it wasn't an issue that I asked for. It was an issue that was being put on my plate actually by the far left in Charlotte, the city where I was mayor at one time. And I begged them not to do this issue in Charlotte. I begged the current mayor and city council, do not do this issue because my state legislature will react. And so Trump kind of stayed out of it. And I think he had pressure from his family, actually, in New York, to stay out of that issue. But then, ironically, years later, Chris Lasavitas, who was his campaign manager here in 2024, is that right? When he got elected, was my campaign manager at that time. And it was their number one issue on the last month of the campaign. So you never know. But I'm not really hung up on social issues, but the left made it look like that's all I talked about. My opponent, when I actually talked about it, very rarely. And it only came up 2 months before in July. It came up, I think, in July. Andrew, you know more about me than I know about me. Is that right?
It was it's kind of a slow burn. March, early March,
Oh, is that
Charlotte
right?
passed the ordinance, and then it kind of trickled out, and then yeah.
And then next thing I know, in fact, I told Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, I was the guest. I said the HRC, which is the Human Rights Campaign, is more powerful than the NRA. I remember Chuck, who I know very well. I ended up being an NBC person later on. He kind of laughed, and I went, "No, I'm serious. This HRC has got money, they've got a strategy, and they label you very quickly, like the NRA does." And so I saw the power of national money when they set a goal and to smear someone, by God, they will. And I don't know what I could have done differently. Everyone says, would you do anything differently? You know, you can't revisit the environment that you were in at that point in time.
Yeah, I also think about, Andrew, to your point at the beginning of this part of the conversation, the way how we've come back to this issue so differently. And you would think it'd be in the opposite way, just as life happens and time progresses. And it's weird that we found, especially with the example of Megyn Kelly and how we found ourselves here in such a totally different place.
Yeah, Megyn totally flipped. I was on her show, and I have no problem with this. You know, I have no problem if someone's in the bathroom with me or the locker room. And now it's her number one issue. So, you know, I guess she's evolved as both the left and the right are allowed to. But,
Sure.
you know, I didn't tell Andrew this, but after that all ended and I was defeated in the closest race in North Carolina history as far as the governor's race, I had some national organizations that wanted me to lead the national effort to fight for this cause. And I was not interested at all. I said, this is not where my passion is. I felt what I signed was common sense, but it's not my passion. My passion was infrastructure, budget, and policy. So, Andrew, I never told you that, but a Washington group wanted me to, you know, be the headline speaker on this issue. And
Yeah, well, you made the right call turning them down. I don't see that as a natural fit for you.
No, it wouldn't have been. No.
Well, I think this is a good segue, sir, to my next question for you. You experienced firsthand the tension between a governor and his legislature, controlled by members of your own party. What did that experience teach you about the importance of checks and balances, not just between parties, but within them?
Who are you speaking to?
Sorry, Governor, that was to you.
I'm sorry. Get me again. I'm sorry. Say the question again.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. You experienced firsthand the tension between a governor and a legislature controlled by members of your own party. So what did that experience teach you about the importance of checks and balances, not just between parties, but within them?
Well, I think the checks and balances is the biggest danger of our government at this point in time. And the founders of our Constitution, they were brilliant to come up with this concept of three branches of government. And ironically, at the federal level, we've had since Obama, Biden, and Trump twice run the government through executive orders. And the Congress is still on the sidelines. Both the Democratic and Republicans are on the sideline when they're in the majority. And the courts have had to step in, which is not the way the founders wanted this. And in North Carolina, which has been a long history, the legislature wants to run everything, including the operations of state government. And even when I was in office, they tried to take away my power, and I had to take them to the state Supreme Court. But either way, there's this push for power. And my concern about politics now, it's not about policy anymore. It's about power, and power brings money, especially super PAC money. And that money goes to where it's like a chicken and egg. What comes first, the power or the money? And it's a circle. And I think that's one of the great challenges. And one of the reasons principle first appeals to me is it's not power first, it's principle first.
That's right. It's I wish that more people in your position felt that way. And unfortunately, we don't always have folks who have a backbone. And I think that it is very easy to be principled when it is convenient. It's a lot harder to be principled when it is politically inconvenient. And I think that is what the marker of a leader is.
Actually, now it's being used as in today's politics, it's probably seen as a weakness.
Yeah.
And I look back at my career, I was very ideological about ethics, about conflicts of interest, and now neither party is talking about it. The red and blue jerseys, if the other jersey does it, they'll talk about it. But if their own jersey does it, they go, well, everyone's doing it. And we've got to change that norm, which is rather new. We've always had corruption and things, but I saw a survey recently where one of the people's negative feeling about politicians being corrupt on both sides of the aisle is the highest it's ever been. And sadly, I see it at the state level too. Some of it's legal corruption. There's no law to deal with it, but it's obvious conflicts of interest. And the money is just, a lot of people want this to continue because as you see the mansions along the Potomac River when you fly in, those are people making money off this stuff. And a lot of people are being rewarded.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, there's certain issues that are really important when you're not in power and then become less important when you get the power. I mean, gerrymandering and redistricting is one of the huge ones. I mean, Republicans complained about that for decades when Democrats were in power, and now it's the other way around. Same goes with pork and earmarks in the state budget. Republicans complained like heck about it when Democrats ran the budget, and now with Republicans in power, we had close to $2 billion in earmarks in this most recent budget. So it's unfortunate that we've gotten to this point where tribalism has overwhelmed the principle so often.
Agreed. And I think it's incumbent upon folks like us, folks listening in this webinar, who are faceless and we cannot see, but they can see us, to hold our electeds accountable. And so grateful when people speak out, and not everyone is in a position to. And but when they are, I think that can move mountains. And Andrew, my next question is actually for you. When you first began this project, you probably had one understanding of Pat McCrory, but by the time you finished writing and reporting this book, I'm wondering if there was anything that sort of surprised you.
Yeah, I mean, going into it, not having a lot of the background, I kind of saw the story as a simple rise and fall. A rock star who wins Wake and Mecklenburg counties as a Republican, which today would be unheard of. Even in 2012 was highly unusual. And 4 years later, he's a political outcast. That's kind of the story I thought I was going to tell. But as I got into it, doing the research and the interviews, what I found is that the real story is a whole lot more complicated than that. And the real story is a story about change, meaningful change, and the friction that inevitably develops.
Absolutely. I think that when you're covering someone, and how many hours do you guys go back? Like hundreds. I think you wrote in here like hundreds of hours.
I put 300 hours on the back of the book. That's kind of where I lost count. It's somewhere well north of that, but 300 is where I lost count.
That's a lot of investigative journalism. I am not a journalist myself, so maybe that is the wrong terminology to use there, but a lot of dedication. So truly kudos to you. And writing a book is quite the undertaking, and you did a really good job again.
Thank you.
Yes, Governor, question for you. You spent 14 years as mayor of Charlotte and has spoken about President George W. Bush being a great friend to America's mayors. Republicans have lost significant ground in many of America's cities since then. What do you think the Republican Party has lost in its relationship with urban America, and how does it begin? How do we begin rebuilding that for Republicans?
Wow. There are almost no Republican mayors of any big city. I was the head of the Republican Mayors Association, but even then, I was elected in a phone booth, and that was 20 some years ago. We've lost the cities as Republicans, but part of that is the demographics, and frankly, part of that's gerrymandering by the Democrats. Most gerrymandering debates are about state legislators, but frankly, all cities and counties gerrymander county commission races, their school board races, and their city council races. And we have that in the major cities. I mean, Charlotte now, we have one Republican in three political bodies. One. And he could be defeated next time he runs. So we're a totally blue city, and yet the suburbs outside are totally red. So sadly, our country is becoming more segregated than ever by not just race, but by political diversity. And when I was mayor, we'd have a 6-5 or 7-4 majority by Republicans or Democrats. And we actually had better governing because we'd find a middle ground. I vetoed 19 times. I was a mayor with a veto. And now in Charlotte, I can't think of any major city with a Republican mayor now, major, big. And with one party control, and I believe this in the state legislature too, where Republicans have dominated. If you have one party control, it's even more about power. The debates are among themselves behind closed doors about who gets the credit. And I think there's more corruption when there's one party power. So this is where the two-party system has failed us, as Washington warned us. And I'm very saddened to see. I don't have a solution to it, except to make people aware of it. I couldn't get elected dog catcher in Charlotte, and I couldn't get elected dog catcher in a Republican primary in the state of North Carolina now, because I don't meet the litmus test of either one. And I think there's a large group of us that feel that way, but the power structure is held by the two parties in both our city and state elections. In the city elections, the Democrats pull all the levers now. It's no different in Charlotte than it is Philadelphia. And at the state level, the Republicans control the elections board. And I think for the next decade, we need to expose it. And I think groups like Principle First are a good way to show people there is an alternative of problem solvers out there and principled people out there who aren't content with the two-party system. That's why I'm real impressed with what your group is doing.
Yeah, if I had an answer, or if Governor McCrory had an answer, we'd be making millions of dollars as political consultants. So, unfortunately, we don't have the solution to it. But I think one of the causes that's overlooked is just how nationalized all levels of politics have gotten.
Yeah.
It used to be, presidential politics was its own thing, state level was its own thing, and local was its own thing. But now it's all been condensed. And who you vote for your city council is almost guaranteed going to be the same party you vote for president. And it wasn't always like that. But I think the hyper polarized media environment has really pushed people to pick a jersey to wear and not let them switch teams, as they go down the ballot.
We are more segregated now than we were in the 60s. I grew up in the 60s and early 70s. I watched NBC, ABC, and CBS News, Walter Cronkite, Brinkley and Huntley, and then later on ABC came on board. But everyone watched the same news. I listened to the Beatles and Motown at the same time on the same station. So we listened to each other and we talked and we debated. Now the media is segregating this society more than ever. And I would have never imagined that 30 or 40 years ago. Never. So technology, in a way, and it's gone to another level with what do you call the computer, where once they find out what you're saying,
algorithm.
The algorithms, frankly, we've had algorithms ever since cable news has come up. even their advertisers know exactly who your audience is. So they are segregating our audience just like politicians. When we run for election, we know exactly who our mailings to, and our message tells the people we're mailing to what they want to hear. So to certain mailouts, you're a conservative, and other mailouts, you're a liberal. And certain commercials you play on radio, if you play on the black radio station, you say one thing. And if you stay on the country radio station, you do another. And the same thing with all the different internet channels now, which has taken it to a whole nother level. And that's a sad commentary. And they get away with it. The politicians do.
And so much of it is angry too. To your point about the algorithm, it's a rage baity, and you see one thing that makes you angry, and you stay on it maybe a little longer than you normally would because it catches your eye, and then the next one is mad, and the next one is mad, and all of a sudden you found yourself.
Well, you know, that's always been the case with eyewitness news, and when there's a wreck, you slow down.
It's true.
Nothing has changed.
Just a different format.
And you look, you slow down and you look. And that's the same thing with the internet now. If it's people yelling at each other or violence, the media will start with that. And the algorithms will start with that. And we do it.
Yeah. We add to it. And I see Rory joining us here. And Andrew, before we go to the audience question and answer, and please feel free to throw them in the Q&A box with the little question mark. I had a question for you, and that is that North Carolina itself is almost another character in this book. What did Governor McCrory's career teach you about how the state has changed politically and culturally over the last few decades?
Oh gosh, you know, North Carolina is my home state, and a lot of what I do in my career is dedicated toward making North Carolina a better place to live, and that's what I really appreciated as I got deeper into Governor McCrory's story is how he shares that same direction. What I'll say is, you know, to understand where Charlotte is today, and to understand where North Carolina is today, you have to understand the story of Pat McCrory. I mean, Charlotte, from the early 90s to today, you know, under Governor McCrory, then Mayor McCrory, Charlotte really emerged onto the national scene. It was kind of a sleepy little town. I mean, I used to work at the Charlotte Observer, and one kind of legendary story from back in the early 90s was the Snickers bar story, where every year or so a columnist from the newspaper would go walk around downtown Charlotte, which we call uptown Charlotte, and try and buy a Snickers bar after 5 o'clock. And you couldn't do it for a long period of time, but today uptown Charlotte is just a bustling hub of activity. And you know, North Carolina was stuck in an economic malaise. You know, it was coming out of the Great Recession, it was really lagging behind. You know, the country was improving a lot more rapidly than North Carolina was, and a lot of that had to do with kind of stale leadership over the previous 5 decades. It didn't all just happen right in 2009, 2010. But you know, what I learned is that I think the state of North Carolina does really value and want competence and leadership in the executive mansion. Now, the General Assembly, the state legislature, doesn't always want that, as they like to have an opponent in the governor's mansion so that they can have a foil to run against. But I think what my book shows is what exactly can happen and how much good can come if you have high quality leadership in a position of power.
Thank you so much for that. And now we'll start heading to our audience Q&A. So here we go. I did the spotlight correctly, so I'll hand it off to Rory.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the Q&A that touch on the same topic, which is the U.S. political landscape is being threatened by two undesirable and disruptive political forces. We've got MAGA Republicans on the right, we've got DSA on the left. Given the amount of independently minded people and political organizations, shouldn't they consider pooling their resources and establishing an independent party that can enable the great plurality of patriotic Americans to vote to install or empower independent candidates who don't need to compete in Republican and Democratic primaries? Another person chimed in talking about, haven't we seen this issue in the past with Whigs versus Federalists? So obviously this is an issue that comes up periodically in our country's history. And Governor, I'd like you to answer this specifically because I know we were chatting informally about this and your role in No Labels, which is touched on in the book before this webinar began. So can you shed some light on that for our attendees, please?
Yeah, I think the only answer is to bring another choice. Even if that choice gets 3 or 4% of elected representatives in Washington or state legislature, if there's a close divide, they can be almost like a parliamentary swing to look for compromise. Let me tell you where the battle was. And this is my experience. I got very involved with No Labels with Joe Lieberman and Ben Chavis, which I never would have dreamed of. And I'm so lucky I got to know Joe Lieberman, one of the great Americans. But I went down to Texas for No Labels and met with a group of very, very wealthy people to support this effort. And they were all for it. These were named people that you read in the news, and they were saying, we're sick of this political system. And they're all in it. They go, my God, the choices we have between Trump and Biden is terrible. We need to find some new choices. Everyone was in agreement. Well, being cynical as I am, I put him on the spot. And I said, well, when you go home and go back to your workplace, will your lobbyists tell you the same thing? Because your lobbyists are going to tell you, hell no, don't do this. Because they're going to then tell that billionaire, if you do this, we're going to lose Senator such and such support on a bill that we're trying to kill or we're trying to get through the legislature. Or we're going to get the president to not do this if you have your name anywhere near this. And I brought this up. I said, I see you being strong in this private room. And it was a huge table. It was 30 people, 40 people in one big room, a very large house. Well, maybe more than that, probably 50 or 60 people. And there was silence. After I said that, I said, I love what you're telling us here, but will you say the same thing when you go back to the workplace? Or will those lobbyists that you have on your payroll or your governmental affairs people on your payroll support your efforts? And that's the problem. Everyone's looking for their short-term needs and not looking at the long-term gain. And they're not willing to sacrifice a short-term risk for long-term gain. So some of them, then with No Labels, and Principle First is probably finding the same thing at the times, they will give you money, but they're going to go play the system at the same time. They're not high risk takers. The money people on either left or right are not. And then the smart ones play both sides. So whoever wins, they're going to have their foot in the door. And that's happening not just at the federal level, that's happening at the state and local level too. And that's the battle. I think most people agree with us. The dilemma is the rules, Rory, are set up to, boy, if you're going to cut the head off, you better cut the head off.
Yes, and another question that we have is for you and also to Brittany, if you want to chime in on this one, but it's, with your platform, is it important to try to move voters away from the fringes of Trumpism and back towards a more principled and moderate government and society?
I think the media and the people don't understand it. It's not moving from the fringes, it's moving from populism. And there are times when I'm a nice populist too, but sooner or later you got to start solving problems and not live on slogans. And I think Donald Trump is a populist, no different from Bernie Sanders. I don't think socialism fits Bernie Sanders. He's a populist. He speaks to class warfare, and so does Trump. And it's very appealing. And I'm seeing now the left, they have some very left-wing things, but in many ways they speak in populist language. which, if you look at world history, that it works for the short term, but then they don't solve any problems. And so I don't think we're really talking about left and right anymore. I think most people are middle left or middle right, but the fringes are the populist who, again, want power, and they'll say anything to get that power, whether it's dividing us by income, dividing us by race, dividing us by geography, dividing us by ethnic or Middle East, whatever. That's what they're doing right now. And that's my theory. How's that, Rory, for a theory?
I totally get that and agree with you very much. And I think recognizing the problem, which I'd say all of us recognize, and then being able to do something with that problem and make Americans aware, I think those are two different things. And I think that's what a lot of folks have struggled with. And that's kind of why we continue to find ourselves in this position. And especially folks who are in the pro-democracy space, like an organization like Principles First is. And a lot of the time I go to these conferences with similar or like-minded groups, and we have conversations, and they're extensive, multiple days, and everybody's lovely. But I think ultimately the way the governor described it now is pretty simple. And that's the point. I think we have a tendency to overcomplicate things. And I think we need to put it, and the American people are incredibly smart. I don't mean it that way, but we just need to be able to put it in terms that people understand how it's affecting your pocketbook, how it affects potentially your family, gas prices, like your everyday things, how that affects. So it's figuring out the best way to do that. And I think that's a challenge that people in this space have had.
I agree with you. And the term by the media and by political people is conservative, liberal, progressive. People don't know what it means anymore. I'm a political science major in college. I'm not sure. They say Trump's conservative. He's not conservative. He's spending as much as the liberals. I mean, it's just so these terms we're using, and again, the terms are being used on purpose to put us into pockets of people to make money, to sell their advertisers. And I don't mean to be cynical, but we can't fall for that. We got to take each issue alone and then a philosophy of how we communicate with each other.
Andrew, you looked like you wanted to jump in here at one point.
Yeah, I was going to say, the real solution that people can work towards, it might not sound like an appealing solution for people who are disenchanted by the political process, but the solution is to get involved in political primaries. Primary elections, for the overwhelming majority of districts, the race is decided in the primary. And primary elections generally only get 7, 8, 9, 10% voter turnout. And a little bit of money and a little bit of get out the vote can really make a huge difference. So, like it or not, that's where the action is in today's political environment. And so I would encourage people to, make sure that the parties are putting up good candidates by getting involved in primaries.
Let me change one other thing, though. I think where Principles First can maybe do the message is the message of Andrew's book, is run as change agents and don't give a damn whether you serve 18 terms in Congress. Be willing to win the first election, but lose the next, because I'm going to change things on those issues that mean the most to the American people and the international events. And so maybe change agent is something we can move on. And I didn't call myself a change agent at that time, but now that I think about it, I think Andrew probably defined me. I was a change agent, and sometimes change agents get beat up, but what they do lasts a long time. I think a lot of people thought Donald Trump was going to be a change agent, and he really isn't.
More like a chaos agent.
Yeah, he's a, and I'm not saying whether you like Trump or but I'm just labeling him as a populist. But this conservative liberal, everyone, even the word fringe or left wing or right wing, I'm not sure what it means anymore.
One of the things that you guys have talked about a lot is how the state of politics has changed, not just in North Carolina and nationwide. So some of our audience members are knowing, what is your take on the current North Carolina Senate race between Cooper and Michael Whatley? And what do you think that that means for the future of North Carolina?
Andrew, I'll let you go on that.
Yeah, I mean, everybody expected, last year, everybody expected North Carolina's race to be the biggest, highest profile Senate race in the country, and it just hasn't turned into that. If you go by the polls, you see Cooper, who's up 8 or 9 points pretty consistently over Michael Whatley. I don't think that the end result will be quite that far apart. People tend to go back to their partisan affiliations and vote. Um, I I think it's going to be more of a sleeper race, to be honest, here in North Carolina.
I Cooper's a unique person. I lost my election to him by 10,000 votes out of 4.6 million. He's a guy whose talent and weakness is he says little and does even less. It's almost like there's two ways to win elections now: say nothing and do nothing, and stay under the radar screen, or be a AOC or a Republican congresswoman who screams and shouts and gets on TV a lot. Yet there are some people who stay under the radar screen and then let the other person be the issue. And the problem Whatley has is Trump's numbers are so low, and the only reason Whatley is the Republican nominee is because Trump picked him out. And I think Trump assumed Whatley was much more known than he actually is. Trump did not know North Carolina politics when he made this decision, but Whatley was the head of the RNC, and he assumed, well, everyone in North Carolina, he was head of the RNC, he was head of the North Carolina Republican Party. Everyone assumed people know. No one knows these people. His name ID is nothing. So he's got to move quick.
We are coming up on 8 o'clock, so we're going to do one last question and then wrap it up. Somebody in our Q&A said, as a former original member of Principles First used to say, for a lot of people in the group that identify as never Trump or sometimes these more moderate positions, in order to truly make a difference, you have to find a way to appeal to MAGA voters. How can we do that without giving up our principles?
I think it'll happen after President Trump's gone, because he's running on person. He keeps them on his personality alone. And by the way, Obama had that talent too in many ways. And no matter what Obama did, he had his 30%. No matter what Trump does, he has his 30%, which is about at right now. And very few politicians have that skill. So there's a personal attachment to him, and as there was to Obama, for completely different reasons, but very similar. And I think it's going to change as he goes out of the picture. For example, I think Eric and Don Jr., frankly, want to run too, but they don't have what their dad has.
Andrew, do you want to have the last word?
Last word, thank you guys so much for having us on this program. The questions have been excellent, and thank you to everyone who's watching. I can't see you guys. I guess you can see me, and I'll just ask you, please go pick up the book, The Change Agent.
By the way, I get nothing from this. This is Andrew's book.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So go on Amazon, check out The Change Agent. You can get it hardcover or Kindle.
And that was my principal, by the way, to Principles First. He, I didn't want any associate. This was his book, and I was going to participate and be honest. And I said, call anyone up you want, and I'll tell whoever's worked for me to tell them whatever they will think the truth is. And he did that. I learned things that I didn't know. So The Change Agent, hopefully when you read the book, you'll see, I think, how the system should work, even through the pain of it. And reading it was painful for me. But the end result, I feel good about it. The process was painful, but that's how the process should be. And ethical, by the way. One thing we were ethical. and principled. And I want to thank principals first. And Rory, thank you too, for getting me engaged with them. And that's the very important starting point is principles. I love the title of your group.
No, and thank you both so much for joining. Oh, I did a weird thing. I think the light is fine. Thank you again for joining. And actually, Andrew, one question for you. This is your first book, right?
It is.
What do we think? Are we going to continue writing books?
Oh, well, I got to recover first before I worry about that.
I made it rough on him.
Hundreds of hours is a lot, for just the interview part, not even like the full writing part, right?
That's right.
And congratulations on that success. Thank you, Governor, for joining us as well. And I'll let you go. If you give me one more minute, just thank you everyone again for joining us this evening. A huge thank you to our incredible guests, Governor Pat McCrory, Andrew Dunn, and of course, Rory Topping. And before we wrap up very quickly, just wanted to say some of the upcoming events that we have coming up. Thursday, August 6th at 1 p.m., we'll be hosting a virtual conversation Congress at a Crossroads in partnership with Issue One, No Cap Fund, and Society for the Rule of Law. Then on Wednesday, August 19th, we will be doing an event with Neil Ghosh, founder of Our Ripple Effect, another virtual event. Fast forward, we'll be going to Iowa for the Iowa State Fair for the second time, Saturday, August 22nd. We'll be there 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. at Lion Energy Landing. And then a couple save the dates. We have one event coming up, October 22nd, that's a Thursday, in Phoenix, Arizona. One coming up Thursday, November 5th in Gettysburg. And this month, in July, we launched a Substack, a TikTok, and a podcast. So Principals First are trying to get to you everywhere. You may have one of these devices in your hands. And again, as always, thank you for being a part of our community. If this is your first time with us, please come back. We're going to have a lot of great events. Thank you to the governor and to Andrew for helping us kick off these webinar series that we're going to be trying to do a couple of times a month. And thank you all. Have a great evening. And I hope that you had fun.
Right. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.